I never saw it coming. One moment I was living my life like any other day, and just like that, everything was to change forever. And in just those few minutes, my world would be turned upside down, and it would never be the same again. Hi, I'm Jacob Olansky, your anxiety freedom coach. And this is part one of my journey of becoming a survivor of trauma to eventually finding my freedom. And my hope in sharing this journey is to somewhat normalize maybe what you're going through, depending on wherever you are in your journey of recovering from your event. And what's important is my event or your event, it really doesn't matter what the thing was. The reality is it was traumatic and it's changed us forever. And what we want to do is go back to feeling as normal, if I could use that word, as quickly as humanly possible, which is to resolve and heal that traumatic event and experience. So anyway, I hope you get something from it. So for me, I was around about 18 or 19, and what I found out later about my event was I ended up having 4 guys come to my house one night very late when I was driving home from work, and they obviously knew my schedule because this ended up, I found out later, that it ended up being a work incident where somebody was a little bit upset that they got a warning for, I don't even know, whatever they did at that particular time. And so they sent around a few of their mates to basically rough me up. So they had my address, however they got that, and they followed me home, and they jumped me when I was putting my car away in my garage. And although it probably lasted for, I'd say maybe less than 2 or 3 minutes at the moment, obviously in that moment it felt like, excruciating long bit of time. It actually took me a little bit of time to work out what was going on. Other than a couple of schoolyard, incidences, I'd never really been into any fights. I was much more of a lover, a joker, a player, rather than somebody that was, going to go around causing trouble. So this was a massive shock to me. Like I said, I remember sort of getting finally knocked down to the ground, and as these 4 guys were laying into me, it kind of took me a little bit to kind of realize maybe I should start screaming out for help, because at that stage I was living at home. So eventually I did, and my parents came out and scared them away, and long story short, it ended. And what was interesting about that was when I finally sort of got up and dusted myself off, I was actually physically okay. They had done a pretty bad job of what they were sent around to do, considering, like I said, there was 4 of them that had me laying on the ground. So I was very, very lucky. However, what I was to find out later in the coming hours and days, I guess, was it was really the after effect of that incident rather than the incident itself that was going to really leave a very long and lasting impact on me. And so I remember sort of waking up the next day. We'd gone to the police station, and that night I went to the hospital to get checked out and all that kind of stuff. And it was all still a real blur, and I was very just dazed and confused. And I was really trying to more worry about what my parents had gone through, and obviously they were more worried about me and my sister and all the rest of it. And then getting up the next day and just not feeling like myself. And it was such a really weird feeling because, like I said, other than some bumps and bruises and a little bit of whatever, I was generally okay. So what was this fogginess? What was this lack of clarity? What was this immense amount of fear that had come over myself? In real, it was just a very, very short amount of time. And that was the biggest adjusting period for me personally, but also what I recognized later looking back, also for my family and my friends, right? Like my family could understand because, when it's your kid or your sibling, there's this massive amount of empathy and care that goes out to them. And for my friends, it's not that they weren't, but because they didn't really see any external damage, they found it really hard to understand the long-term effects that it was going to have on me, really for the next, 9, 10, 11 years of my life before I eventually found the very thing that kind of, totally healed me and freed me from the past. And so that whole settling in period and this new version of myself that what I later found out I'd gone into what we call survival mode, right? So I'd adapted these particular symptoms and side effects that were all really there to make me feel secure and safe. So obviously I wasn't sleeping at night because it was a night attack. I was super hypersensitive and hypervigilant to any sounds and noises in the street or around my house. I didn't leave my house for a matter of weeks. Obviously my appetite had gone. I had massive, I ended up getting quite bad reflux. There was nausea, there was tight knots in my stomach. the shakes, just constant, eyes were constantly, flickering, trying to hear beyond. I couldn't focus on any types of conversations that I was having with anybody because I was always scanning my environment and remembering that this is even in my own house. So I was just trying to hear what my neighbors were doing or what was happening on the street. And we lived in a relatively quiet suburban area. So all of that took a lot of adjusting in that initial phase, just to try to work out what this new version of me was, how long was it going to stick around for, and the ultimate question is, could I ever revert back to the normal version of myself? So stick around for part 2 as we go a little bit deeper into the next version of my first meeting with a traditional therapist. That was interesting.